God stepped out on space and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. And God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun, and he set that sun ablaze in the heavens, and the light that was left over from the sun. God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with moon and stars. And down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down. The sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left, and the stars were clustered about his head. And the earth was under his feet, and God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw, and the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders roared. The waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed, and the pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of the ground. The rivers ran down to the sea, and God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his hand, and he waved his hand, and the seas and over the land, and he said, bring forth! Bring forth! And quicker than God could drop his hand, fish and fowl and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. And God walked around. And God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun, and he looked at his moon. And he looked at his little stars. He looked at his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. And God sat down. On the side of a hill where he could think by a deep, wide river, he sat down with his head in his hands. God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river he kneeled him down, and there the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et ha'aretz. V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu v'holshek al panei hatehom. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim v'yomer Elohim yehi or v'yehi or. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. Vayavde Elohim et ha'or ve'et ha'hoshek. Vahi-erev, vahi-voker, yom echad. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and without form. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light and saw that it was good. was evening, and it was morning. Day one. In the past week, as I've tried to understand what a sermon on creativity and the creative plunge might be all about, I have been absolutely amazed at how little time one spends thinking about creativity. When one begins to pick up not only the book of Genesis, but the powerful drama of creation by James Weldon Johnson, the black poet and preacher that I read first, one can understand that creativity was used by the individuals writing those accounts. And they are talking about a God of creation who utilized creativity in his own activities. But when you sit down and look at the biblical commentaries, they deal with the historical aspects of it. They talk about the Babylonian creation account. They talk about the Mesopotamian creation account. They talk about the Egyptian creation account. They talk about the Aztec creation account. They talk about the biblical creation account. They talk about accounts in the historical development, but absolutely nothing about the concept of creativity itself. I went through my Bible dictionaries. I looked through books on theology. There's a great deal on creation and whether or not God created out of the nothingness or whether God created out of something already there. And the great debate between all of this in terms of the biblical dimension. But without exception, I could not find even a listing for creativity. I looked in the books on theology. I thought maybe the theologians and the philosophers would deal with behind it, but they don't. My first point to you is a plea. As you're reading materials, magazines, as you're looking through the books that come across your desk in your homes, as you're looking at the magazines coming out of your trade associations and so on, please, for my sake, clip everything you can find on creativity. Because I could find almost nothing. Isn't that interesting? One of the foundations of the human spirit is creativity. One of the foundations of the whole biblical account is that we're made in the image of God, who is first and foremost creator. One of the things that we need to recognize in terms of our own our own individual life and existence, is that each and every one of us needs to utilize the creative spirit born within us, part of our godly dimension, to enable us to overcome not only life itself, but to live it more joyously. As I tried to reflect a little bit on creation, I came across 2 or 3 ideas that I think might be interesting. It is an unfinished sermon because, like so many, it is a constantly growing sermon. It is something that I hope in the weeks to come I might re-preach after you bring some materials into me, and we can work on it a little bit together. First thing that occurred to me as I tried to understand creativity is that most of what we call creativity isn't. Sidney Harris, in a column this week, was talking about why he never writes about the energy crisis. He made an interesting statement. He said, I don't write about the energy crisis because it's unimportant. When I gulped. I went back and reread that portion of the column to make sure that I hadn't missed some little word in there. No, he said, it's essentially unimportant because the energy crisis represents the need for technical development, and the human spirit has always been very good in terms of its technological development. Where it's lacked, and he didn't use the word, is in its creativity of what to do with the technological development in order to utilize it for the more deep human problems of life. We can send people to the moon and let them live there, but we can never learn how to help them to live there creatively. How to live without war, how to live without fighting, how to live without those kinds of things deep down inside of them that enable them to overcome and to be happy, whole individuals. Those are the essential areas in which we need to work. And we think about it. We have sort of a blithe feeling in the advancement of the human spirit. We talk without too much consideration about the other side of it with the growth. We've got things that are happening. I reflect with Chris, whose grandmother is very ill and who is 97 years of age now, and how much fun I've had over the years sitting with grandmother at 97, 94, 92. You've had the experiences. And listen to her reflect on what life was like when she came to this country from Switzerland in the 80s, as a young girl living in Oakland County. She came on essentially sailing vessels and has lived to see rocket ships in space. And she can talk on one hand about that tremendous sweep, but you know what she talks about when she really gets going? The people, the sameness, the oneness. What's happening in 1880 and 1890 and 1900 and 1910 and 1920 and 1930, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 2000 is that people still have not utilized the creative spirit to answer the human problem. They've relied upon a false concept of science that has now allowed them only to deal with the externals. But the creative spirit of God throughout is that creation has purpose. And the purpose is not creation itself, but the purpose is to enable man to live more openly, honestly, happily. So I would like not, in our thinking now, to talk about the fact that we have an energy crisis. That is something that will be handled. I would like to move our minds out of a little bit away from the technical kinds of things and to move more into the human. I realize it's not easy, but let's make the effort. Creativity is not something which is taught. It is experienced. I would argue that that's true of all teaching. There is no such thing as teaching. There's only experiencing things together. I was reading last evening, late, a book on ethics written by an Englishman by the name of Powell-Smith. I love English names. They always hyphenate everything. And Mr. Powell-Smith, writing this book on ethics in the Penguin series some years ago, talked about the fact that ethical behavior was the prime function of philosophy, and that every philosopher from Aristotle to the present day who has truly dealt with a philosophical understanding of life has said, I cannot teach you how to live creatively. If you want to know, watch those who do it and copy them. Now, what a burden that puts upon you parents. You want to know why your kids do certain things? And you get angry because you can see yourself doing it, right? That means that the learning experience that very often that you are most unhappy with in your kids are precisely the things you don't like about yourself. Not always. They learn from other places. I don't want to put you on a guilt trip, but I want you to realize that essentially we learn how to do things, how to think, how to creatively work when we are working with other individuals and they challenge us to find it within ourselves. You don't teach people, but you can give them the opportunity. We have to do something around the house. We can't find the right tool. You can ask your child, how would you do it? How would you do it? Let's try it that way. If it works, the child has learned something. If it hasn't worked, he's also learned something. You can say to a child as you're trying to grow up, I'm not sure. How would you do it? And as they begin to reflect and come back, how would you do it? You can reflect too and say, I'm not sure, but I think I would approach it this way. You spend your time in church, not because Jim Lyons is so wise, but because people sitting around you in these pews have experienced almost everything you're going through, and you want to know how to handle it, and you say, don't tell me how to do it. Let me share with you so that I learn how to do it. It's not taught. It's shared. I think, secondly, that creativity means taking a hard look at the obvious and passing beyond that to what is not so obvious to see the differences. One of the things, and one of the reasons I talk about the meeting coming up on Thursday evening, is that there are always certain obvious things that come out at every meeting. Seldom do they work. They don't work because they're obvious. That the real creativity says these are the things that we can do immediately, but if we're going to look towards problem solving, let's begin to define, first of all, what the problem is, and then to identify the resources we have to solve it. About 1.5 years ago, I played a game with you. You probably don't remember it. I almost ought to do it again. I said to you, if I could give you all of the clothes hangers in the world, I give you 2 minutes, and I timed you and gave you 2 minutes to list all the things you can make with the clothes hangers. You remember that game? And everybody sat there, and they sweltered and all of that, and I said at the end of the 2-minute period, and some of you are thinking what you could be doing now that weren't here, I said, how many of you listed 100 things? And you all laughed. I said, how many 50? How many 25? How many 10? Well, I think we had 1 or 2 that got up into the 8 and 9 range. Most people listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Why? They were caught off guard naturally, but they thought of clothes hangers in a very simplified way. Little stringy metal pieces. And then we began to talk about it. What are clothes hangers made out of? Metal. Wire, right? Plastic. Come on, what else? Wood. What else? Cardboard. Metal, plastic, wood, cardboard. Literally everything that can be made is made out of those 4 things. Oh, I realize. You can even with plastic make tires if you had to. So essentially, when you begin to look at it, every single thing that can be made in the world, almost, without exception, has the ability to be made out of what are the materials of clothes hangers. But you know what you listed? This is exciting. You listed the things that you've used clothes hangers for. Think back on it. The practical engineer in the group shouted out to hang clothes on. Very good. That's obvious. Most people miss it. Some people said to hang plants. I'll bet you the one who said that has hung plants with clothes hangers. I did this with a group yesterday, and somebody walked in and said I couldn't get my car started right in the middle of it. 4 out of the 5 people in the group listed breaking into a car with a clothes hanger. They were stimulated. You utilize the kinds of things that you have done, and you listed those things because it's precisely the point that I'm trying to make about creativity, is that creativity is a shared activity, and you learn from past experience. And part of what you learn and can teach your kids is after they list the obvious things, to ask them to look for the non-obvious. For problem solving is a matter of putting together the practical and the obvious with the non-obvious to do ways. So in all of our lives, as we face a number of kinds of experiences, the challenge for us is to grow. I think secondly, in this particular field, and I got one other thing that I wanted to make it even more personal about in terms of our own individual lives, problem solving at the lowest level is an attack of person. It's absolutely amazing to me that when people have a problem, the first thing they do, because it's the easiest and it's the lowest form of existence, is attack somebody who might be involved. You see it in businesses all the time. We need to double our sales next year, and we would do it if you weren't such lousy salesmen. If you guys will get out and do what you're supposed to be doing, we will double our sales. We've got the potential. It's your fault we're not doing it. What does that do to a salesman? Absolutely nothing, except say, geez, it's a good time to look for another job. Am I right, salesman? It doesn't turn you on. It doesn't help you to understand that things are there and the potential is there. It doesn't motivate you at all. It makes you defensive as all get out. And companies that have problems, churches that have problems, families that have problems, individuals that have problems, who find some guinea out there to say that's the fault, will never, 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 never solve the problem. I cannot say that too strongly. Because then it is not a matter of solving problems, it's a matter of defense and accusations and trials, and we all know that no trial really solves problems. It merely gives an equitable distribution of guilt. What is problem solving? Problem solving is looking beyond the obvious and taking a hard look at what is going on in our lives. And as we see what is going on in our lives, problem solving says, what do I have in terms of my own strengths and weaknesses to enable me to reach out and to change? What do we have as a company? What do we have as a church? What do we have as a family? Within our own existence, the ability to rearrange our priorities and understandings and talents and commitments and so on, so that the problem, the potential, the growth, the excitement, the happiness, the joy can be found as a collective. It's at this point that I want to talk about the creative plunge. Isn't that a marvelous term? What is the creative plunge? It comes from a book by the name of written by James Fifield, a congregational minister. It was quoted by Doug Lobb of our sister church in Milwaukee, and therefore I put it in. What is the creative plunge? It is the bold, decisive act by which you smash through a wall that has hemmed you in throughout your life. It is the bold, decisive act by which you smash through the wall that has hemmed you in all of your life. Let me give you an example. One of the top-notch speakers on the circuit today is an individual by the name of Ty Boyd. Ty Boyd was a very successful insurance salesman and owner of an insurance business in Minnesota. He had 4 children, a large house, a big mortgage, 3 cars. He was paying for everything. He felt the burdens. He enjoyed speaking. He was doing an occasional speech here and an occasional speech there. But something within his existence said, my goal in life is to get out and to talk with people because I think I've got something to say. He doesn't talk about it, but one can imagine what was put on him. But you've got the mortgage, Ty, on the house. You've got the cars, Ty. You've got the kids, Ty. They're all getting ready to go to college, Ty. How are we going to pay for it? And he still sort of reached out and did the thing. And he tells the story that one time in his existence, he said, I have reached the point where if I am going to do what I have to do, I've got to do it with my total being. And he sold his insurance company, and he left his job. And he kissed his wife and the 4 kids and said, I'll be back in a week's time. He said, I was so scared I didn't even want to try to do it in my own city, so I went to a city where nobody knew me. Very biblical. Went off to serve other gods, you see, as David did. And he said, I got into that city, and I went to the bank, and I bought rolls of dimes, and I sat down with the phone book, and he said, I called in a phone booth because it was cheaper than sitting in a motel, starting at the beginning, every business, every opportunity, every trade association, every real estate firm, everything that I knew of that could possibly use a speaker. And I sat there for 1 solid week, and I booked 5 speeches. And I knew I could make it. And I've never regretted, because I'm happy at what I'm doing. Now, everybody sitting in this group right here has things which hem them in. Some of them are valuable. Some of them are important. Some of them are protective. Some of them enable you to survive. That's fine. But there are things which hem us in that are upon us that we place there ourselves that we need to begin to understand in terms of taking a creative plunge. It may be a matter of faith. There are people who say they believe but don't. They're afraid to open themselves up to trust in God so completely that they let things happen instead of trying to make them happen. The creative plunge in faith is to smash that kind of hemming in and to allow the power of God to move towards and through us. There are people who do not believe and trust in other people. They may claim it, and therefore they try to manipulate other people to do their will. And the creative plunge may be to break through and to trust a husband or a wife or a child or a friend or a church or a committee or an organist or a son or a daughter. There are people who are tied down and they feel the pressures of a job and they say, oh, I would if I could, but I can't, and it's so difficult. A fellow minister, a man at the age of 58, was facing the opportunity for the first time in his life of being a totally free individual, and he is terrified. Does he take the plunge and break out of the church where he has been serving as a pastor for 40 years nearly, and do what he knows he has to do? Or is he so hemmed in by fears of what might be out there that he doesn't make the move that he needs to make? How easy it is for each of us to be trapped. And it is difficult. And there are all kinds of things that move around us. But the thing that I want us to walk out of here with this morning is that there is an opportunity in our lives in a number of different directions to take a creative plunge. Most of us are like cats. We creep along, and when we're cautious, we take and we have all three of our paws down, and then we reach slowly out and touch. Most of us look at the pool, and we dip the big toe. It's not all bad. But by God, there are times when you got to come running out of the house right off the board and hit the pool full of sea. There are times in life when the water's cold, but I'm going to warm it up. There are times when you got to leap with confidence, knowing that you can overcome and do. There are times when, for your own soul's sake, you got to say, by God, with God, through God, I can and I will, and nothing will stop. Create a plunge. Ultimately, that creative plunge is one of the foundations that enables life to go forward. But even the creativity of God is reflected in the fact that we need to do so many things together. I think it's fascinating that God does, and God does, and God does in the first chapter of Genesis till you get to the 22nd verse, and there suddenly God says, let us make man in our image. So part of the creativity is sharing. The plunge is mine alone. The help, guidance, creative urges, the potential are the things that we give to each other. Even God needed help. How much more do we need? Even God could say, let us. How much more we need to say, let us.